So this week was two articles: Activism or Slacktivism, the Potential Pitfalls of Social Media and Contemporary Student Activism. And then next was The Digital Activism Gap, How Class and Cost Shape Online Collective Action. So I'm going to talk about that one first because I really enjoyed it. It was very enlightening to read, honestly. Never stopped to think how technology, yes, has its advances, and it makes it easier for everyone to be involved, but in reality, there are some digital gaps and inequalities when it comes to technology. So this article really dove into the aspects and the inequalities that come with technology. I really found this intriguing because a lot of people think that low cost of digital activism broadens participation, and it really helps everyone be involved in a sense, but that's not necessarily true. And this article points it out that there's 4 points that they make, and that's working class face higher costs to produce online content. What they mean by that is not necessarily that it's going to cost more for them to buy things. It's going to be more costly for them to participate in online things, because what are they giving up in order to do that? Next is class power. Middle and upper class have better internet savvy, and lower don't feel comfortable. And what they mean by that is that the upper and middle class have more education or more access to this technology, so they feel more comfortable with it and more savvy. What they mean by that is more able to interact on technology and have a voice and be heard. And the lower class just doesn't feel comfortable in participating in such thing because they may lack education, may not know how to function a site or a social media entity, so they just don't feel comfortable. Next would be literature, so really diving into that educational gap, and when it comes to the social classes. And then it does not contribute to class-based pluralism and a democratic society, so it's not really opened up to everyone. I really found this article intriguing because I was someone that thought that because technology is available to everyone, it did allow everyone to be more involved with many aspects, whether it be politics, protest, common knowledge, things like that. But that's not necessarily true, because what if someone hasn't been taught how to use the technology they have, or they don't have the time because they're working in order to provide for their family, so they don't have the time to get on social media all the time. And so it really made me realize that I'm very privileged to have the life I do, because I'm able to get on social media when I please, and I know how to function it. Maybe not the best, because there is some, I'm in the College of Business, so there's some crazy cyber whizzes and technology whizzes in our college, but just being able to function it and feel comfortable posting something or commenting on something, that is a privilege in itself that I did not stop and realize was a privilege, because some people don't feel comfortable posting because they may lack the education and the common English or the proper English to comment on something, so they don't feel comfortable posting, or don't feel like their voices are going to be heard because they're not using the proper nouns, verbs, commas, and all the other stuff. And then they also don't feel like they have the time to do so because they're too busy working to provide for their family. So it was very eye-opening to read this article, because it allowed me to see that I do have the privilege to do such things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that digital activism is open to everyone. It doesn't mean that it makes it more equitable for everyone. It's not realizing that not everyone comes from the same playing field. It could make it more equal, where everyone has an equal chance to get it, in a sense that everyone has the ability to, but it's not more equitable because we're not stopping to realize that people are coming from different classes. So just because I give them a phone, if I give 2 people a phone, the person with the higher education or the person with more money is going to be able to buy those apps that help them succeed, or they're going to be able to have that education that's going to help them write the article and blog and website or code something, rather than realizing that, yes, I may give them 2 phones, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be able to do the same things with them because of their knowledge or their money or just their ability to work with technology. So it really comes down to making sure that we're looking at it from an equitable standpoint rather than it's making everything equal. And I like the point in the article where it says that digital activism is not egalitarian, because it's not allowing they're just not able to, the working class may have websites, but they're not able to have it fully utilized in a sense, because they're not having that those people that are able to volunteer come in and really push that social media presence. And a lot of them stated that they were taught how to use social media, or they were taught how to use something and they just forgot it because they didn't use it often. So those upper middle class, upper class, middle class have the upper hand when it comes to that technology and digital activism, because they're using it a lot and they have the ability to do so because they have the time or the resources and the people to do it. So digital activism isn't egalitarian because it's not really allowing everyone to be active in it, because we're not looking at the digital inequalities that come with it. Next was activism or slacktivism and the potential pitfalls of social media and contemporary student activism. So it talks about how first is power, and then it really talks about diversity and slacktivism. So it really dives into 10 aspects. So basically it talks about how 10 things can really see if it's activism, because activism really needs to stem back to self-reflection. And so this talks about how there's certain things that need to be self-evaluated in order to see if it's activism or slacktivism, because recently it states there's a lot of mix with the two. So first they talk about how student activism involves an intentional, sustained connection to a larger collection. So what that means is that you're going to have to make sure that you stem out to more than just a few people. You really need to get that larger collective involvement. And then it talks about how student activism involves developing and exercising power. So basically making a group that is outside of it be involved in something they wouldn't do if you wouldn't have told them to do it. So really involving that power of not necessarily strongholding them, but having that power of your voice and your knowledge in order to sway people to your side and help do something they otherwise wouldn't. Next is really talking about how most contemporary student activism utilizes social media, but not all social media is activism, and slacktivism is contained on the internet, but not all internet activity is slacktivism. So a lot of a tongue twister, but basically talking about how social media needs to be utilized in a particular way for it to be activism, and that sometimes people portray it as slacktivism, but it's not. So really talks about how you need to tell the difference between the two. And then number 4 was to be a student activism and a description of behavior as opposed to an identity. So it really keyed into someone that identified as all these different things, but in the end it was a behavior that really pushed her and that made her strive for certain goals. Next was student activism must tell a degree of risk, so it can't just be something that has no degree of risk. Basically, whether you do it or not, is it going to have risk? If it doesn't, well then it probably isn't going to be activism. It's more slacktivism, because what is the potential risk for you? Yes, some people may have higher risk than others, but it still needs to have a degree of risk. And then number 6 was student activism must be guided by a utopian vision, or a vision of what social progress looks like. So not something stuck in the ways, but really striving to really reach a difference and make a difference. And then hope is the foundation for student activism. So hope is a tribute that fuels the struggle, whether it manifests on a person or online. So hope really needs to be the driving force behind it, really hoping that you can reach that goal and really pushed to that utopian vision. And then number 8 was, even though student activism seeks to change the political landscape, it is not the same as political governance, or campaigning. There we go. We'll use campaigning. I have trouble with that word. But how it's talking about, it's going to change the political landscape, but it's not necessarily going to push and push and push a certain stance or campaign for someone. Rather, it's going to help people identify what political landscape they want to be on, or something that is going to reach that utopian vision. And then number 9 is, very few people actually emerge in student activism. They really, because of the confusion, there's a lot of people who are engaging in activism or in strategies of actual activism, but a lot of people, it basically means that activism is starting something and really pushing it towards a common goal and reaching that vision. And just because you're doing something because of a social responsibility, it's not necessarily activism. You may feel socially responsible to do something, but that doesn't mean it's activism, and doesn't mean that it's slacktivism either, but it's not necessarily activism. Just because you feel responsible to do it because of society doesn't mean that it's social activism. So you really need to stop and take a step back and do the other evaluations in order to get to this step. And then lastly is social media are more, although not entirely, democratic spaces for organic intellectuals. So it's allowing everyone to have their own thoughts and be intellectual in this sense. So digital engagement in the end is really something that you're seeing on campus more and more. So we really need to be able to tell the difference between activism and slacktivism. And this article really gives steps that you're able to go through, these 10 steps, really see if you're being an activist or not. It made me stop and evaluate how my project is going to be portrayed, because I'm going to have to stop and look at these 10 things in order to see if it's student activism or slacktivism. So I really need to stop and look at this, and so this article helped me in that sense. And the other article was just very eye-opening to see that just because technology is available to everyone doesn't mean there isn't inequality and gaps. Now we need to realize those gaps in order to better lower those gaps, I guess you could say, or better facilitate how the gaps are being addressed, because we're not really approaching them as gaps. We're saying that they have technology, so they're fine, but that's not the truth. We really need to come in and be able to help those and help them feel comfortable in their voices being heard on a digital platform. So that's just some areas that those 2 articles covered, and it was very enjoyable to read, especially the second article that really made it eye-opening that just because you have technology doesn't mean you necessarily have the ability for your voice to be heard, because you may not feel comfortable doing so.